Yes.
How deep are those green bars? Is that 30 feet?
Yeah, but I just drew those on PowerPoint, so they're not to scale. I know, but I just drew them in there. Yeah, those are schematic diagrams.
Hey, Jeff. Hey, I was just going to say to Amy, you probably will talk about the levels in water, because they have levels for water, and you'll get to that.
I will.
So even though they don't have a threshold for soil, there is one for water, and he's going to talk.
And what they do with the soil numbers or the water numbers is they run calculations based on exposure. So they put it through a complicated formula with, are there kids playing in it? Are they, are there adults? Are there workers? So there's OSHA regulations. And basically, if you work at a contaminated site, you're allowed to be exposed to a little bit more than if you're just an innocent resident. Supposedly.
Sadly not.
Okay, so here's their map. Here's a map looking down on the building. They outlined here, oops, there we go. They outlined the approximate extent of TCE in soil. And just for your knowledge, there's where the 830,000 was. Okay? Now,
Where is Mills Gap Road in that last?
Mills Gap Road runs right up here, right?
Yep.
Yeah, right up here.
Well, okay.
So it's kind of in the back side of the building. The Rice's property is down here.
We're Southside Village.
Southside Village is over here. Now here's the thing, in 2010, CTS, I'm sorry, it's MacTech and CTS, they put together a confirmation testing plan to confirm that their SVE system worked. I remember very well because it was Mother's Day and I heard about it later, but I spent several hours at Barry's mom's house, Tate's mom's house with Tate and Barry, and they had they had everything in their brain, and Tate had a printer with him, like a portable printer, but not really, it was a regular printer, but he takes it around. And he printed out, and I was like, give me this, and give me this, and give me this. And then Barry took what I said, because I was I couldn't work on it immediately, and he put it into a report and submitted it on behalf of the CAG. And what we plotted was, in yellow here, these are Barry's little handwritten numbers. This is where they plan to do their, quote, confirmation testing. Does anyone notice what's missing there?
Right where it is.
The 830,000 spot, no sampling. Then we're like, let's look at it, we're looking at it from the surface, from the sky. Let's look at it from the side, right? Remember where the 830,000 was, right at the bedrock? Whoops, well, there are two that are kind of close. But when you look at it from the side, the two that are kind of close, there's where they were going to sample. Right there and there. In the text of that report, they said, oh, we're going to go every 5 feet down to bedrock. They were going to do that over here. And they were going to go where we all knew the contaminant was, they were only going to go to here. It was a confirmation testing plan designed to confirm the soil was clean. And we put that in a report, and we got to sit down with some high-ups at EPA within about a week. It was about a week, right? It was at UNCA. We had had several meetings, and so this was a big deal. And we said, why don't, while you're drilling this hole, why don't you keep going a little further? And EPA at that point agreed and said, okay, we're going to make them go a little further. And the next 3 years was spent negotiating with CTS to go a little further on those holes. In fact, there were emails back and forth that I received that where CTS claimed, we understand you've been receiving input from the community. And EPA said, we're allowed to receive input from the community, we're a public agency. There were other things that they had problems with. So fast forward about 3 years. There we go. Fast forward about 3 years, and last week, was it last week or 2 weeks ago? I received, the Rices received a copy of the recent NAPL report, and I got a copy of it, and I looked at it, and here is their map of TCE extent in soil. It looks fairly familiar, doesn't it? Very similar to the 2004, only this is the one, if you can see the numbers over here, it's from May 2014. So it's fresh off the presses. Looks very similar to the one from 2004. There's where the 830,000 was. They drilled a hole to within 4 feet of where they sampled in 2004, and the number was 1.1 million parts per billion. So somebody just asked, wouldn't it be, over time? Now, their confirmation testing report, they haven't let us see yet. We have to submit a FOIA. However, in the EPA report, what they said, these community reports, some of you may have gotten one right before the meeting coincidentally. In their last report, they did give some tidbits about how clean this soil is. I don't know how you can give like highlights of a cleanup without giving the report to everybody, unless you're trying to seed public opinion ahead of time, which I think is what they are doing. But that's part of why I'm doing this tonight. I was very excited when Mrs. Rice asked me to do this, because when I got back I was gone for a couple of weeks in May. When I got back, there had been some reports on the news, on WLOS, in the Citizen Times, and various community members about, have you heard the news about a new plume and something new? And then I got the report, and there is nothing new in that report. If you want to explain a lack of action previously, you can do that by saying something new has happened. But nothing new. This map of TCE extent is almost the same. They have it a little better defined because they have more sampling points. But the concentration went up here. Oh, this was my great thing. This was a funny thing. So TCE is denser than water. And it's found, this sample with this number was 28 feet below the surface or 16 feet below the water table. L-NAPL or D-NAPL? You all could work for AMAC. Here's their summary of findings. D-NAPL was not positively identified. On Friday, there was a very awkward moment. Actually, it was about an awkward, what would you say, 20 minutes? We were standing outside of Terry's house. Terry was not home yet, and there were 4 EPA officials and 2 NC Department of Public Health officials, and we're all kind of standing there like this, waiting for Terry to get home. And I said, so Samantha, tell me how they claimed D-NAPL was not identified. And she tried to explain to me. Well, they pull up the soil and they do a little chemical test in a beaker, and they see whether the bubbles rise or fall. And I said, but you have TCE, which is denser than water, 28 feet below ground, 16 feet below the water table. How can that not be a D-NAPL? And she said, well, it's hard for me to explain. She's like, I'm not explaining it well. And I'm like, no. And so,
What was the date of this?
this was last Friday.
Last Friday.
This was Friday while we were waiting for Terry to come home. And she referred me to someone else who was also there who had been to the site once that worked on D-NAPL sites, and he didn't say anything. He kind of stepped back. And I think he went to take a phone call. I don't know that part for sure that he took a phone call, but that was the end of that conversation. The point being, when someone tells you we have a new L-NAPL plume, there is nothing new. That L-NAPL was there in 2004. If someone says we have a new, we'll worry about the D-NAPL later. The D-NAPL, they're saying it's not identified. That's not correct. I don't want to get into any politics or policy. Policy we'll do a little later. Politics maybe, Congressman. But the science bothers me when people get the science wrong. Oh, you can see the green here leaking.
It's actually in your water.
Oh, yeah, look at that. It's in the water. Some of it is, a little bit.
I've seen it leaking 35 years ago. Now, this is nothing new to me. I've seen that 35 years ago up there when they poisoned the cows down the road.
Yeah. So we've talked about the NAPL fraction. The other fraction that we have to talk about is what's here in the bedrock. Okay? Where's the bedrock going? Well, actually, we'll do this first. Where's the groundwater going? This is a map from July 2009 showing here's the site. This is Mills Gap Road. Where's the groundwater flowing? To the base of Southside Village on one side, to the Rice's Springs on the other. That's 2009. This is 2014. Groundwater flowing to the base of Southside Village, groundwater flowing to the Rice's Springs. Anything new? No.
Stops at the fence line.
Well, they didn't test out here. That is kind of convenient. Here is the plume map from 2009 report. By the way, I will give you, anybody who wants these reports, I will send them to you. They're not my reports. They're publicly available. Now you'll see there's some question marks here, again, right at the fence line. But part of that is they didn't have any sampling points past that. It's hard to create like a map with only 5 data points. So I understand that they did the best they could. 2014, they have more data. So the plume is better defined, but it looks pretty similar to me. So the shape of it is a little better defined because there's more data points, but the plume is the same. There is no new plume. Okay, I don't know why.
Excuse me, can I
Yes.
ask a question on the previous one?
Yeah.
The triangle in the middle of the yellow, why is that?
Well, they didn't detect in these three wells, they didn't detect any TCE. What it really is that the flow is this way and then it splits and then it flows this way, so there's a little area here. This is kind of a high point too.
So the yellow is the plume.
Yes, and you'll notice this is 2014, this is 2009. I mean, they're a little different, but not a lot different.
So Jeff, they stopped the plume because I guess in theory, like 1223.
Right here?
More to the left. So if you come down where the plume no longer extends, it's because those came up.
These ones came up clean.
How deep did they go though? Because I have talked to people who were employees that said that on that secondary road, on that loop is where they dumped the barrels out.
I watched them.
I don't know offhand for these particular wells how deep they are, but they're in the report if you, I don't know if you have a copy or I can look for it in the report.
And I was told by former employees just in the last 72 hours that there were barrels buried there in that same location and that only some of them were removed. Right there.
Right here?
Yep.
Well, they didn't test right there.
Right.
Don't test where it might be. And test where you know it won't be.
I just wanted to interject and basically answer this question. One of the themes throughout this EPA history is sampling location has been critical. And they've never, and the reason why there's no plume map there is because they've never sampled there. And as you can see, it did stop at the fence line. And but sample location is everything. So you're not going to find it where you don't test. And we've asked them to do a little bit broader sampling, and that hasn't happened. Most of these sampling plans have been dictated by the EPA, the CTS engineers. So
Did you ever show
Yes.
them that spot where we watched it bubble up, Gary? I
So-
watched it for years.
There's been a problem with, there's been a problem with sample location, and Barry was relentless on getting this point resampled. And I mean, we had a conference call at UNCA, like on one of those fancy things where you can see the other people or hear them in a group. And I mean, we're arguing point by point on where a well should be drilled, and CTS is challenging, no, we want to go 10 feet this way. I wonder why. So this is what's been going on for those of you who want the behind the scenes of where a lot of hours have been spent. But the point is, when they drilled where really we insisted, that's where they got 1.1 million. So that's where it is. We feel very confident about it. What's that?
Thank you very much.
So I want to say a little bit about the fractured bedrock. Tate just asked me about that again, right before I was about to go to the slide. I've got stuff in a good order. So there was a very good study done by USGS, and actually the North Carolina Geological Survey did a study as well. And what USGS did is they used some wells on the CTS property. They also used some wells up here in the Oak subdivision. And what they did is they went into the wells and they put a camera down the bottom. And this right here is a picture of the inside of the well. And I have copies of the report. It's available online. It's USGS Data Series 538. If you Google it, it pops right up in a nice colored PDF. And I believe since you've already paid for it, you can get a color copy sent to your house for $5 shipping. What they were able to do though, so this is a picture of the inside of a well. Think of a cylindrical well where they open it up like this and you get to see the picture. Using that, they are able to look at where the fractures are and map the fractures and map whether they are horizontal fractures, whether they're more vertical, whether they're oriented this way or that way or this way. This is a very intense analysis, okay? And then what they did is for each well on this rose diagram, basically if they had one that's oriented this way, they put one little blue square that way. And if they have one this way, a little blue square this way. What you notice is, where are all of the fractures oriented? from the southwest to the northeast. This is on a direct line from CTS up to the wells that have been contaminated. I read in the paper yesterday, of course, CTS is going to court to get off the NPL, and according to the paper yesterday, it said they claim there's not sufficient evidence that they are the source of the TCE. This, if anyone tells you that, by the way, in the community update today, Samantha said she's willing to meet with any of you individually, I believe starting 2 weeks from now. It's important that somebody is there who can, this is, and they know this now, but I mean, this is, can you say that to them? I'm not going to say that, but the point is, there is sufficient evidence. You could not have any more conclusive geologic evidence that that is the source of the TCE.
All roads lead to Rome.
Now, there could be another source. I can't say there's not, but if you were doing a test, which they did to see whether there was any evidence for it, yes, there's a lot of evidence.
If we write that number down on that,
This
that, we could say that number and that would be they'd know where to go look.
USGS Data Series 538.
On the computer, you can just look it up.
Google it. If you Google that, it'll pop right up.
Takes you right to the website. It's the
Yes.
first thing on Google. Yeah.
So here are the wells contaminated. This is a composite. Here it is. Here's the document. A friend of mine who goes to our church took that picture. He's a geologist. And they did another cool thing. They put down some sensors down the wells where they could actually identify each one of these red things is a fracture, and each of the purple here is contaminated fractures. Now what's really weird about that, of course, not weird, but the nature of fractured bedrock is that there's some fractures up here that are contaminated. This is like 5 wells. And there's some fractures down here that are not contaminated. People say, well, why were there only like 7 contaminated wells in the Oaks, or 5, and not others, and somebody's neighbor's is not contaminated and someone else's is? Well, if your well happens to only be sucking water out of these fractures, you're fine. If your well happens to be sucking water out of these fractures, you're not. And so that is exactly what you find in fractured bedrock. It's not like the whole neighborhood is affected. It depends on your well, how deep it is, and where it's open versus where the casing is. Okay, we're on number, let's see, 8, I believe, on your cheat sheet. Okay, so let's talk about the very front of the plume here, which is heading towards the springs, both in the bottom of Southside Village and the springs on the Rice's property. I got interested in this, I'm a teacher, and thanks to Mrs. Rice, I'd say over 200 UNCA students have been to her property. And it's been a tremendous learning lab. Dr. Wazaleski, who's back there, she teaches chemistry. She's taking classes out there. I've gone out there with her, and we really appreciate it. And one of the things, a lot of them have gotten to meet Mrs. Rice, and I've explained to them that my mom is a strong woman, and so is my wife, and that you're on the top 5 list. So these are some of my students collecting samples. We get to teach them how to collect samples and how to treat people affected by contamination with respect and dignity. So one of the things we did is collected samples. First of all, Doc kept asking me, will you just climb the fence and go in there? And for a long time I said, so we collected samples outside the fence. Here's 1340 where it runs outside the fence. So kids could still play in 1340, not in the 22,000, but in the 1340. But the thing is you go across the street, this is where the storage facility is, those of you who know the area. You go down Concord Road, still 140 parts per billion, but you get down here and you can't detect anything. So the good news is the TCE does not affect streams very far from the site. So sometimes I hear people on TV saying it's going to contaminate the French Broad River. That is not true. Do not say that. Okay? But the bad news is, where did all of this TCE in the water go?
In the air.
In the air. It's volatile. Why is it down to 0 over here? Because it's all gone into the air over here. They brought a Tagabus in 2008 or 9.
07, 08.
And they drove down Mills Gap Road. The hottest spots are in red, where the stream goes under the road. The hottest spot in red over here, where the stream goes under the road. Any surprise here? No, not at all. You might ask the question, why did they drive up into Southside Village and test? Why did they drive into Terry's property and test? Why didn't they drive up into Hidden Valley and test? We know a bus can turn around there according to the Citizen Times. They didn't do it. I don't know. I don't work for EPA either. I do this to just point out something. When EPA has assessed the site for health risks, and it got turned down, didn't make the NPL, they kicked it down to the state did a health assessment and then basically benched it. They do some things to figure out how dangerous it is. They score it based on precipitation, hydraulic conductivity of the soil, how toxic is the waste? Oh, very toxic. How much is there? Quite a bit. Slope, what's the slope? How much rain? Distance to nearest surface water, toxicity. So this is for groundwater. This is for surface water. This is from a 1993 North Carolina Division of Waste Management Inactive Hazardous Site Branch Site Evaluation. And this is the page for air, and it's blank. This was North Carolina. This was the state of North Carolina. But similarly, in the early NPL designations, the air route was ignored completely. So you say, well, would it have scored higher on the list if they had included air? It couldn't have scored lower if they'd included the air. So I would say yes. Okay. So let's talk about the air, which is why some of you have made it to this meeting today, I think, who maybe have not been to previous meetings. There was so there's vapor intrusion. This is the typical vapor intrusion where you have contaminated groundwater, a plume underneath the house, and the vapors come up through the house much like radon. They took a sample in December of 2007 from Terry's crawl space. Terry, is it okay if I share this information? Okay. Doesn't live there anymore, so. I have to skip some slides very sheepishly if you said no. So they tested it. These are all in micrograms per meters cubed. They tested it in December and got 20. They came back in August. Here's some pictures of them in August. By the way, I have this report if you'd like it. On the little cheat sheets I gave you is my contact information. I really like doing this. This is my job, actually. Not to do it for you guys, but I teach all day. So they came back in August 2008, and it was 7.4. It was 6.8 in the house. They put a little hole in his crawl space to sample the soil air below the crawl space, and that was clean. The contaminated air is not coming from below the house like radon. It's coming from outside. They hung one on a fence outside right here. You can see them doing it. They took nice pictures of each other. This is official photograph number 4. They took one inside his house in the crawl space and the soil gas. And so 8.6 outside and a little bit lower inside. He actually was better to have his windows closed. On Friday, what they said is normally we vent your house, but the outdoor air is worse. They took a sample on the other side of the springs, right near where the most contaminated spring is. They haven't sampled from there yet, again. But the rental units that you have on your property are over here, where the families were evacuated on Friday. In 2013, yes, Lee?
What does TCE vapor do to your lungs? What does it do to you?
It is also cancer causing. They lowered the number, the threshold level based on increasing health studies showing non-cancer effects too, like headaches and upset stomach and a lot of things that are hard to tie to TCE. But there's a lot of cancer and non-cancer impacts. Cirrhosis of the liver. Yeah, ask this guy later. He might know more about that.
Birth defects?
Okay. There's a sheet of paper that you can find on you let me know, I can get one for you, AtSDR.
It's not water soluble. Is it oil soluble?
Is what oil soluble?
TCE, oil soluble? It's not water soluble,
Yes.
but it is oil soluble.
Yes.
I wonder if it's getting central.
Are they what?
I'm just thinking about other health effects that get into yourself.
Lots of questions.
Showers? Yeah. Let me just keep going here so that I'll ask for questions maybe at the end. But in 2013, Mike Mason of WLOS asked me if I would collect a sample for him, and I said sure. So we actually purchased, well, what I did is I called the lab, they sent me one of these, I opened it up, it fills with air, I send it back, and their number that they got was 21. Remember what it was, 8.6, 21 last year. EPA came and tested this year, and now it does come in the paper, and this is one of the most frustrating things, it comes that the Rices were refusing access to their house and it delayed EPA. That is a toying with the truth in that the Rices were demanding a full analysis rather than what they wanted to do was collect one sample right here. And we said, no, if the outdoor air is the problem, we want the outdoor air. And he lives here, not here, so we'd like this tested. So they came back and they tested in his crawl space, they tested in his house, they tested outside, and the night they came, Terry, or maybe it was a couple days before, he said, would you let them test it? And I said, yeah, but open your windows. That was a cool night, right?
Yeah.
And that took 2 years to get there.
2 years, no, it was 2008 to 2014. So 2014, they came back and tested and got 16 here, 14, and 11. And those are the results we got on Friday. Now the difference here is that EPA has recently adopted a new threshold level of 2 for indoor air. The old threshold was over 100. So I just want to say that, you know, it comes in the news like something miraculous happened last week. That, you know, this is, I mean, these numbers, 16, last year was 21, before it was 8.6, indoors 7, 11. It's roughly the same as 2008. So if you're here tonight because you're concerned about the new air testing that was done this month or last month, there's nothing new here. It's just that EPA has decided to their credit, to recognize the new health studies that show how hazardous TCE vapor is. And so this is something that we have been reading, you know, again, I read the literature, I get journals, I go to professional conferences. The health data shows vapor is worse than anybody thought previously. And so credit EPA, and the first thing that's going to happen, that's probably happening this week, is that CTS is really ticked off with EPA. How can you enforce a new standard on us? So they're going to get pushback from that side as well. So the thing that if somebody asks you about it, say, EPA finally, thank God, is taking real health data into account. And we should be very happy for that and very supportive of that. And if CTS pushes back on that, we need to be on EPA's side for that particular decision at this particular time. Now you can talk about 2008, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, another time. Okay, my last points here are what can we do about this? Okay, that was 11 and 12. So we're down to the last 2 points here. What are some treatment strategies? And I'm not going to go through the whole thing. I can talk for a full week of lectures on this. But what you're going to hear them talk about, I think, is something like a containment structure or what's called a permeable reactive barrier. What's that? That could be what they put in. I don't know this, I'm just predicting. What they're going to do is the removal action is to clean up the air. In order to clean up the air, they've got to clean up the springs. And so what you can do is put in a little trench. Well, you can put it, you dig a trench and then you fill it with something that will react with the TCE. A slurry of something, and they use wood chips and zero-valent iron, and there's a bunch of other things you can use. So this is not to scale either, this is schematic. So what you do is you dig a trench, you put something in there that will react with TCE and hopefully prevent any of it from reaching the springs. That is an okay temporary solution to reduce the concentrations reaching the springs. However, I'll point out they tried this in, was it 2010, 2009? 09. They put in an ozonation system designed to do the same thing. This is Mills Gap Road, this is Terry's driveway. These are ozone injection wells, and what they were trying to do was inject ozone to treat the TCE before it reaches the springs.
So that just makes your sampling look good and doesn't address the source.
Well, what it is a Band-Aid. So temporarily Band-Aids are good, but if you're gushing blood, you still need to see the doctor. So they're going to talk about permeable reactive barriers, and if you hear them talk about permeable reactive barriers on the news, I hope that you'll say, that's okay temporarily, but what about the source? Because you do this, it's a Band-Aid to make your samples look clean, move Terry back into his house, alleviate those of you who live in the immediate vicinity around there, and then you all go back to your homes and don't worry about it again, and they're like, phew. Meanwhile, the sleeping giant is still there. So I hope you're all here tonight. I hope you'll all be here in the future, even if they put in one of these. That's not, you see trucks and they will for sure claim success. They'll put out a community update and say, look how clean the springs are. Okay, but what about the source? Somebody had, well. All right, so there's a bunch of things that can be done to remediate D-napples, although I will say L-napples are much easier to clean. They're much easier to do. Actually, the surface soil is the easiest, but I think, according to the half-page community update that I received last month, the surface soil is probably pretty clean. They ran an SVE system. It did remove TCE. The rest of it, because it's a D-napple, is down lower. So the surface soil probably looks pretty good right now. The next thing that you would do that's the easiest is attack the L-napple, because it's easier. You can do pump and treat. There's a lot of different things. It's shallower, so it's easier to get to. And so the other thing that when I got back from my my trip last month, I heard about a new L-napple plume, which for one, it's not new, and for two, the L-napple is not really the main problem. And so I have a feeling we're going to try to get sidetracked onto the L-napple rather than addressing the real source, which is the D-napple. The D-napple is very hard and very expensive. I think I put that on the last number 14. It's going to be a long and expensive process, but they can start it pretty soon if they wanted to. And by they, I mean CTS and AMAC, by the way, not EPA. EPA could do the cleanup, but so could CTS. CTS could decide to do this tomorrow. What I think makes the most sense is to do some sort of an in-situ flushing, which is basically where you have injection wells and pumping wells. And there are different things, different chemicals you can inject into the well to make the TCE more soluble. And then you can start pumping the water out. So pump and treat, for an L-napple, pump and treat works great because the well sucks the water right into the well, and it's, the L-napple floats on the surface and moves toward the well. For D-napples, it's harder because you can put a well in, start pumping water out, and the D-napple doesn't care to move toward the well because it's driven by gravity. So what you need to do is tease it a little bit. And this picture I stole off the web earlier today. This is where they added some bacteria and other electron donors to basically treat the, to get the D-napple moving to where they could suck it out. So this is an injection well, this is a suck out well, and then they can treat it at the surface. There's other things that are like surfactants that you can put down that basically makes TCE more mobile. Instead of being a D-napple, or more soluble. Instead of being a napple, it becomes more soluble, and then you suck out the water just like you suck out water at your houses with your wells. That would be what I would prescribe. This is what it kind of looks like on the surface. I stole this offline too. So there's really some cool stuff with thermal remediation where you essentially heat up the TCE to biodegrade it. I mean, TCE is volatile. You heat it up and you can turn it into something else. Chemical reactions, and combine it with traditional pump and treat. That is my summary. I don't know if we're going to do questions now or if there's a couple quick ones maybe.
Doctor, how long did something like that take?
Years.
Can you repeat the question?
He asked how long something like that would take, and I would say years. But let me just add one more thing real quick while you say that. Because there's another treatment option, which is called natural attenuation, which is the fancy Nancy word for do nothing and monitor it. But the thing is, there is some truth to that, because what we call bugs, there's some sort of microbes or something, I don't deal with those, but they eat those organic molecules. A couple of years ago, we had a student at UNCA whose dad is a hydrogeologist. He was telling his dad about this site. His dad came to move him in or out and said, can I come take a look at the site? And he came out, he looked at the data, and we have a lot of DCE. TCE breaks down into DCE microbially, and we have a lot of DCE, which means we have a lot of microbes. Those bugs are trying to eat that TCE. There's just so much of it. They're being overfed. They can't reproduce fast enough to eat the TCE they're being fed. As soon as we start removing some of this, those bugs are really going to help. And if we can get rid of this source, those bugs are really going to do the work. But the source is so big, you got to get rid of the source in order to let the bugs do their work, and then, you know, but still years. Yes?
What did you say before? In that 10 years, there's been a threefold increase at the lower level to about a million from 400 and some odd thousand.
830,000 to 1.1 million. I'd say it's gone up somewhat, but in reality, you have to dilute a sample a million times just to run it.
Yeah, what would be the projection over the next 10 years?
Well, I think, you know, if you just...
Most of that PCE now down at a lower level?
It'll continue to go into the bedrock fractures and head up. And if I lived in, you know, they talked about moving the radius out. Where's the... I mean, if it were me, if I had wells and I lived up here, I'd be a little concerned. I mean, this is where the contaminant's flowing in the fractured bedrock. So even doing a radius, when they do the testing of a 1 mile radius, you don't really need to test over here. You really need to go 2 miles over here rather than 1 mile in this direction. But yeah, it'll just keep spreading for decades, 100 years.
Behind Terry's house, up the hill, is there a lot of worry?
Oh, about the air? Yes, the question was up the hill behind Terry's house, is there worry about the air? I don't know. I'm assuming there's a lot of people here tonight. I don't have anything to report because they haven't done any testing that they've reported. We've been asking for years for more air testing. We've been asking, the other thing is, if anyone's been to the Rice's property, some days it smells bad, and some days you don't notice it. Some days you're standing there and you don't notice it, and then the wind blows a little bit, and you're like, woo! And some of you know about that if you've been there. And so we need to find out, you know, which direction, you know, do a study with wind direction and wind speed. And they don't, you know, EPA is not built to do a study like that. And, you know, we said, you're basing this on one 2008 sample. This is not appropriate.